Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cade. Welcome to Pierced Heart Apologetics. Today, we're going to be talking about my testimony. This is by no means going to be exhaustive or, very highly detailed, just to save time and for brevity. So I'm not yapping here for an hour. But it was somewhat of a long journey in terms of just the amount of years that it took for me to first leave the faith as a young child into accepting it back a long while after. So starting out, I grew up in church. There wasn't much of a theological instruction, like at least particularly good theological instruction as to why we really believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. It was kind of just the given of, well, we believe in Christianity because of that. And it's like, well, that's cool, but you didn't really give me a reason why that's true. Um, my parents were fairly active, and they were, fairly active within the church, and then we would go to the like after school, like childcare and stuff like that. But by middle school, I was not. I was choosing to not go to Sunday services or anything like that. And the first part of my life that really made me start to question whether or not anything was true, like any of this was true, was the death of my grandfather. I was quite young when he died, and a lot of it just made me think along the lines of like, well, why would an all good God, all loving God do this? Like, sure, my grandpa wasn't a perfect person, but did he really like have to go now? And I mean, I can look back now and recognize that I didn't have a very good appreciation for what exactly it was that God had in store. I wasn't thinking with the eternal perspective of, well, my grandfather's, physical pain here on earth is done and he is now with him, or at least awaiting the day of resurrection, I should say. Um, and, it was really just something I couldn't wrap my head around. And so I started looking for answers, but I wasn't really looking for answers to keep my faith. I just wanted some solace that other people were thinking the same things that I was. And I surely found those people. And they were very convincing, especially with their particularly, shall we say, smug, even pompous attitudes, acting like you'd have to be a complete and total idiot to believe in any of this theism stuff. And at that point in my life, I mean, your smugness and confidence was all you needed to make me feel like you were saying the right stuff. Um, so I abandoned the faith. I'd say starting late sixth grade, probably by seventh grade, I would say I was fully abandoned it. I was going through a lot of changes as far as like what I believed about all sorts of stuff along that time. But going into the rest of seventh grade and into eighth grade, I was starting to receive more social issues in my life regarding my friendships and things like that. And that was really just a compounding of what would happen with me really considering life uh, in a more, big picture kind of screen. It's like, well, if there is no God, there is nothing out there, then, when I die, everything that I did was going to be forgotten. I'm going to be forgotten. No one's going to remember me. And even if they were to remember me, I'm not around for it to even matter. Like, it doesn't even, why would it even matter to me? And so I was really struggling with this existentialist, thought and depression that subsequently came, leading to suicidal ideation, albeit not, praise God, albeit not acted upon. Um, so I kind of intuitively understood that there is no objective meaning to life. Even if I couldn't articulate it in any sort of philosophical way, I kind of just understood it to be true. And I still think that that's, the coherent atheist position, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think that there's, objective value if there is no God or spirituality or anything like that. But that really wrecked me and that made me just depressed. And there were other contributing factors, like I said, social issues, as well as like just looking at my future. I was pretty bleak about what I had in store for future post high school and things like that. But anyways, my eighth grade summer, after eighth grade, going into my freshman year of high school, was a lot more chill, and I got a lot more distance from, that social pressure, and it allowed me time just to cool off, and I kind of just abandoned my existentialist thought because I just couldn't handle it. It was just way too much anxiety, and it was so exhausting. So I ended up just kind of abandoning it. It was like, okay, whatever. Like nothing actually matters, but whatever. I'll just make my own meaning, I guess. I'll just do what I want. That's kind of what I resorted to, was a chosen delusion, pretty much. And what I would say is, that's kind of how a lot of people end up living their life, which is really unfortunate because there is the true hope of Christ. There is the true meaning that is found within humanity. And I kind of asked myself the question regarding, because I thought about my own experience with suicidality, and I asked myself, well, what has changed over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 plus years that has made my, my generation the most suicidal generation that there is? Like, why is it that we have some of the best standards of living outside of maybe, a few years of like COVID and whatnot, but like some of the best standards of living, and yet we want to kill ourselves the most? Now, I thought of things like social media, but I don't know if that was actually, I just wasn't convinced that that was sufficient. So I started to look into where people had gotten meaning historically. And this led me down to the, philosophy routes of like things like virtue, like cultivating virtue and good character, charity, things like this. And it kind of boiled down to a pretty core aspect of the gospel, which is that we are valuable. You know, even though we're very flawed, we're valuable. And that second part of being very flawed, the fact that we've all sinned, I found that through not only the virtues, like learning more about the virtues. There was one, Thomas Jefferson, for example, was somebody that I heard about, and I heard that he actually had a notebook that he would write down, and every day he would try and jot to see if he actually exercised like the virtues on a daily basis. And like there's photos that I saw online where it's like, oh yeah, he didn't do it that well all the time. Like it's not that easy. You have to try to be a good person. Um, and that was something that I was like, huh, that's interesting. Like being a truly good person takes effort. Um, and I just found that interesting. Then further other, influences. No shock. This should be Jordan Peterson. Um, he had. I remember listening to him speak about a book called Ordinary Men. I believe that's the title of the book, and the premise of it was basically documenting ordinary men, as the title would suggest, who were German police officers as Hitler was rising into power. And one of the things that he spoke about, how these men turned from just some dude who is, could have lived in your neighborhood, like someone personally, could have been transformed over time into the type of person who would like execute, women in fields. And it's like that shook me. That made me wonder, like, well, hold on a second. Am I really immune to such things? Like, if, like, it seems like this could happen to anybody. And it just made me wonder, like, am I really that good? And I really came to the conclusion that I don't think I am, you know? And so as we, as I continue listening to Jordan Peterson, there are other influences regarding things like his takes on the Bible. And as I listened to him talk about the Bible, he changed my perspective from it just being a bunch of silly fairy tales, like people say online, um, to something more meaningful and something that you can actually glean, a very unique, um, like narrative to life and the way that things work. And that was just the beginning of me changing everything about the way I thought about the Bible from, complete dismissal to serious contemplation over it. And the other aspect was politics. That was my idol pretty much before I came to Christ, came back to Christ, was politics. And that's because, I mean, I was fundamentally incoherent because, like I said, I would just make my own meaning. Even though I fundamentally knew, like I knew that without God there is no meaning, I never actually really believed that because I believed that it was wrong to murder. I believed that all sorts of things were wrong. But then in the same breath, I would tell you that nothing matters. Like, totally incoherent, but that's besides the point. Um, I then found this through more political Christian thought. Looking at the first abolitionists, for example, who, reasoned that abolition of slavery should be done because all of mankind, including black people, are made in the image of God and they are innately valuable. And I never really got that concept. Like I said, there's not like some great theological understanding that I had about the Bible in my formative years. But I just was fascinated by it. And that made me think more and more. I just kept consuming more and more of the Bible and Christian political thought who would just spew out theology because that's, the foundation of, their belief system. And the more and more I listened to it, the more it just made sense. And, simultaneously, with the world being crazy with like COVID and things like that, I was so worried because like I just had no peace. I had no peace. And I just was like, I remember I was working out in my basement, and I just prayed to God and I was like, God, I don't know if you exist, but like the world seems like it's going crazy. If you are real, we need you. And I just prayed that. Like that was the beginning. And I just continued to just try praying. And as I continued praying, I went from this notion that like I don't know if there's anything there to kind of hope that there's something there to just a firm sense that there was something beyond me that mattered and cared for me. And there are other aspects of things that just seemed weird of like I believe God speaking through people to teach me something that I didn't even realize I needed to hear. One of those examples was one of the guys on a political podcast saying like, "Oh, if you need to feel God at all moments in order to believe that He's real, you're never going to." And that made me wonder, like, hold on a second, is that something that I felt like God had to do? Like God had to be in my life in this particular way that I set up? Like, do I actually have the authority, the right to say, "Well, God, you have to act in this way in order for me to believe in you"? And I just realized I don't think I actually have that. I don't think I have that kind of right and that perspective to be able to put a restriction on God of how He must act. Um, and that's kind of like a humility aspect of just like, coming to God more humble and realizing, oh, I don't understand anything about this, but I'd love to. So that's kind of me coming to faith. After a while, I just kind of accepted that God did exist. I believe that He existed. Went and got baptized not long after I graduated high school, like 2 months after, basically. And then I started having doubts a little while later. I wasn't making the best decisions, and kind of had to come back to like, okay, why do I believe this? And I'm having all these doubts, and I'm hearing all this stuff online, and all this stuff seems cool, and the meaning is really awesome, and it seems true. There's all this stuff that seems just ultimately true, like love your neighbor as yourself. Everyone agrees with it. Everyone agrees that it would be perfect. And but is it more than that? Is it really more than that, or is it just some wise dude? Because before I was like, I don't think that this is sufficiently answered by just being a wise dude. And then I had the, weird interactions that I kind of relate to God speaking to me. But then, coming from the more analytical side, the more logical side of like, okay, but did any of this actually happen? And as I looked into the evidence, between just the reliability in the New Testament, the fact that we have so much, so many manuscripts, and we have all the church fathers, like I was just kind of blown away of like just how good we can probably trust that what is written in the Bible today is very, 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 very likely what was written in the original manuscripts. And that was just, the beginning foundation. It's like, okay, well, you have that. But then I think about the apostles, and it didn't make sense to me that they were lying or that they were just misunderstood. And this isn't about, me presenting a fully fleshed out argument for the resurrection of Jesus. I'll have another video of that later at one point. But it was not convincing. I felt like there were too many problems with, them being just confused. Like, they'd have to be constantly out of touch with reality if you're taking the Gospels as, well, this is what they believe happened, but they were just wrong. Like, John's Gospel says that all the works of Jesus, if they were written down, there would not be enough books. It's like, okay, well, if they actually believe that, then these people are like psychotically out of touch with reality. Like, I don't even know how they survived in a first century context, let alone are this coherent when writing and this capable of starting and running and building a church across multiple nations. It just didn't make sense to me. And then the line part didn't make sense to me either. It just didn't. Again, too much of it just seemed true from just a like moralistic and emotional standpoint of like, this is it's too much wisdom in one centralized, one centralized, not like institution per se. I mean, kind of, but like you have this group that has what seems to be the most wisdom out of any given, group of individuals. Because you look at I thought about the philosophers and it's like, okay, yeah, a bunch of those guys are like wise, but they're also very scattered and they have wisdom a little more in pockets of their work. And then other areas of their work, it's like, maybe not so much that. Anyways, I'm rambling. I don't want to ramble too much. But anyways, I just came to the conclusion. It's like, okay, I think the best explanation for, the resurrection account is that he really lived, he really died, and he really rose from the dead like he said he did, which is the central claim of Christianity. So, that's why I continue to believe, and that's what I will be here defending as an apologist. And that's one of the things that I'm going to have to get better at understanding. And, you know, that's about all I got to say. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them if I can. If not, have a wonderful night, everyone. Goodbye.